We're starting a series today of 4 weeks, 4 Sundays that grow out of one idea. It's really 4 responses to this one claim about what it is to follow Jesus. So if you don't like today, come back next week. If you like 2 out of the 4, I think we're doing just fine together. The sermons and worships are going to relate, but there's no problem if you miss one or only catch one, or if you go back to Austin or wherever you might come from. If you do miss one, and you still want to follow along, we have started putting sermons online right here. And for now, they're on Facebook and YouTube, and maybe after worship, someone can teach me how to update the church webpage. But in the spirit of openness, it just seems silly to hold on to our message here just in this place and in this time, since we can spread it out there, and maybe someone will be less intimidated to listen online before they come and visit and hear great music and see smiling faces and take part in our community. So in case there's anyone out there in the world right now listening to this, church, would you say hello? Hello! All right. Right at the top of your bulletin, there are some words from Karl Barth. It says, "The church is directed every day, indeed every hour, to begin again at the beginning." And if you don't know this name, this guy Karl Barth was one of the most influential Christian thinkers of the last century. So you've got like Martin Luther King and Mother Teresa and Billy Graham and a few popes, and then there's Karl Barth and a few other people right in there. So, which doesn't mean everything he said is right. I don't agree with him on anything, but this quote I really kind of took a liking to. So as we begin a relationship, as I begin to be part of your church, I want to begin at the beginning. What are the most important aspects to being the church? What are the most important aspects about following Christ yourself, or to cast our net really wide? If you want some kind of relationship with God, or whatever name you want to put to that thing that other people call God, if you want some kind of relationship with that, where do you start? What's first? I've got 4 answers for that over the next month. In the story Mark read, Jesus says that children have the key to faith or to heaven or to living as disciples. The question is, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus says the first thing, be like these little children. And what's so special about them? Verse 6 said, "If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me," it'd be better to all that other stuff. Okay. And for the time being, let's just skip all that other stuff. And let's skip for the time being the child advocacy about welcoming children in and being nice. Let's just put that on the burner and say, what is it about these children that Jesus is holding up as a model of the beginning of faith? And he says, this is what he says about the children. "These little ones who believe in me." And this, we must assume, is Jesus' way of pointing to a model of faith. And probably the most common answer in America for where does faith start is that one heavy word, belief. If you want to be a Christian, in so many places around America, you are supposed to believe one thing or 3 things or 10 things about God, about Jesus, about you, about heaven, about hell, about anything. You make the list. You've seen the lists. And then, when you believe those things, then that can impact how you act, and that can impact how the world has changed, and that can impact anything about eternity that you might want. And I'm suspicious about that kind of belief. On one hand, because Jesus is pointing to children when he says that, and I've rarely met children that age who can understand or really believe some of the complicated theology and claims that a lot of churches make. I've met very few adults who can really understand a lot of the things that churches say you have to believe. Churches put it on their website all the time. What we believe. Our church doesn't have that, by the way. We don't have a what we believe. Maybe because we're just too diverse. Maybe because it matters more what we do. I don't know. But in this situation, I don't think that Jesus is pointing to those kids and saying, kids, when you agree with this one thing or these 10 things, well, now you're on your way. He says the kids believed in him. And it's at least worth asking, what does that mean to him, that the kids believed in him? Another reason why I'm suspicious about belief, personal story time. My name is Hansen. That is spelled Hansen. Many of you, naturally, a lot of people spell it just like that prepubescent band from the 90s. I was in college when Mbop came out, and I persevered. If you don't know the song Mbop, you didn't miss anything. But my name is spelled Hansen. And that all started, as names tend to do, when my parents made an agreement. And if I was going to be a girl, my mom got to name me. A boy, my dad got to name me. Well, it was Dad's turn. And he decided, right there in the hospital in Fort Smith, Arkansas, that this was going to be Eugene Henry Wendland. Now, mothers deserve veto power sometimes. And my mother did not like the name Eugene. So they talked about it. They compromised. And Eugene's last name was Hansen. These were my father's grandfathers. So I became Henry Hansen Wendland. Got it? That's an easy way to get the name. And so I went by Henry for most of the beginning of my life. They called me Henry. Hansen was just this kind of leftover name. About 1 year old, somewhere in that first year, my dad left for all kinds of crazy reasons. And my mother sought out help to raise me. And she found this wonderful family called the Harrisons. Now, I grew up in hillbilly Arkansas. And if you have images, if you have stereotypes, if you have jokes, you can tell me your jokes. The chances are they're true about this family. Jim Harrison, God rest his soul, was a hillbilly man. He worked on the highway, the highway kind of maintenance patrol. So he would come home in the orange vest, and he would smell like asphalt. And he had this scruff all the time, and these big Elvis sideburns. And I would give him a hug, and I can still kind of remember this scruff on his face. Ellen, his wife, also had plenty of facial hair. She chewed tobacco so much that her bottom teeth had just gone. So you get the image, right? They would bring me to a Southern Baptist church, kind of the hell and brimstone. Like if they read the story we just read, they would be folks, cut those hands off kind of church. And if I acted up, I had to cut my own switch. Has anyone here ever had to cut your own switch? I hope many of you are too young to even know what that means, but it's terrifying to do that. To really cement their status as hillbillies, they just couldn't read. They weren't fully illiterate, but they kind of had about a second grade level. And to this day, when Ellen sends Christmas cards, precious, they're loving, but they're full of misspellings, they're full of second grade grammar. So these godparents of mine are just good people, hard workers, they're loving. If it wasn't for them, I would never have made it alive, probably. I certainly never would have made it out of Mountainburg, Arkansas. Certainly never would have made it to college or anything else after that. So I owe them everything. But what does that have to do with my name or belief or God or any of that? Well, remember, my first name is Henry. I went by Henry. And when I started to learn how to read and write, I could spell that. It's easy, Henry. Somewhere in there, Jim and Ellen, almost illiterate hillbillies, taught me how to spell my middle name, Hansen. Okay, you hear it the way they would hear it? So there was no reason that their hearing it would be wrong, but my father was, with the name where it came from, he was gone, Greece or India or jail or something. So they just sounded it out, Hansen. And that's how I spelled it. There's my middle name. You never use it when you're in 6th grade. But in 7th grade, I decided to affect some of my own self-confidence to be who I'm going to be, and I started going by my middle name. I decided, stop calling me Henry World, I am going to be Hansen. And so I would spell it out on my paper, Hansen, and that there was no reason to question it. It's on my high school diploma that way. It's on my first driver's license. It's on my passport, Hansen. So when I turned 21, I looked at my birth certificate for the first time. I squinted, and I looked, and I squinted, and I looked. By God, it's Hansen. I had to come to grips with the fact that for 20-something years, I had been misspelling my own name. My whole life, I had believed, without a doubt, I had known it. There was certainty there. Everyone around me agreed with this belief, and there was no reason to question it, that my name was spelled with 2 S's. And that belief was wrong. It was false. And so when it comes to other important beliefs in my life, and when it comes to me thinking about belief with a journey with God, where to begin our relationship with God, that kind of belief just seems weak or the wrong place to start to my history. In the Bible, that right there, surprise, it tends to agree with me. The word belief in Greek is pistis. Say that with me. Pistis. Easy word. It's rather common. About 12% of the time that it shows up in the Greek in that Bible, it is in the sense of, I believe that something is true. I believe that is a guitar. I believe there are about 70, 80 people here. I could be wrong. I'm just guessing. I believe that Mark has a cool mustache. You could agree with any of those beliefs, or you could disagree, but about 12% of the time that the word pistis, or that version, shows up, it's a I believe that something is true kind of a sense. And yet American Christianity and so much of our faith stories have really focused on that 12%. And when churches get into that kind of belief, they fight amongst each other. They fight about gays and guns and poverty and homosexuality and church music. Church music is the biggest thing they fight about, based a lot on certain beliefs. And who wants to start your journey with God fighting with other Christians? So often, the beginning of faith in America is what you believe, especially compared to what they believe or to what they believe over there. Belief becomes a border. It's a way to categorize who we are and who they are not. And I do believe that there's a value to that kind of belief. It's there. There's a value to that. It does great for people who are forming deep Christian connections. I don't think it does so well with the first step into Christianity. It does great for people who are looking and searching for answers. I don't know that it's the best kind of thing for people who are just searching. But for whatever good that kind of belief does, it also has served to exclude and alienate and shut down conversations and generally choke the American church for the last 10 or 20 years from any real growth. Someone asked me about the 88%.
What about the 88%?
What about the 88%? The Greek word for belief is pistis. Say that with me. Pistis. It is a rather common word. About 88% of the time in that Bible, it has the sense of, I believe in something. I believe in someone. Which is the words that Jesus said about those little kids. They believe in me. In Matthew 18:6 again, if you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me. If anyone has another translation at home, it might read, there's another one out there called the New Living Translation. It says, but if you cause one of these little ones who trust in me, I believe in you, I trust in you. Now think of little kids. Think of them especially in third world countries. How many people have ever been to a third world country and played with a little kid? Do they trust you right off the bat? They want to play. When I went to Haiti last summer, they just ran up to me and they would hold my hand and they would climb all over me and they would want to teach me games and they would tell me things in Creole. And we have less of that in America, probably for a good reason. Our kids shouldn't just run up to everyone. But there's something beautiful about the way that kids can trust. They just assume that you are there for good. You are someone to play with. They trust that you are someone who's going to look out for them. They believe in you. And in ways that we adults can only dream of, they have open hearts, which is on your church motto, by the way. Open and welcoming doors, open and growing minds, open and faithful hearts. Such a good motto that my church back in North Carolina just stole it. They just put it on their website last week. It's flattery. It's kind of weird. But if open hearts is our motto at this church, and if Jesus is pointing at children and saying the beginning of the kingdom of God is open hearts and trusting each other, I wonder, what would happen in your journey of faith if you started pointing yourself toward a trust in God? If you started to accept that maybe God, despite the things that have happened in my life, God has been on my side this whole time. God has helped me get to this point. What if we thought, like a child, what if we thought of God as someone to enjoy, something out there for good, and something that looks out for us? Imagine if you built mutual trust with God? What could happen in your life? Pistis, 12% of the time, I believe that something is true about God or Jesus. Pistis, 88% of the time, I believe in God. I trust the example of Jesus. I propose, we can make this a session kind of amendment, I propose that we follow the Bible and that we worry about, I believe that something's true about 12% of the time, and that we decide to devote about 88% of our Christian heart toward trusting God. A number of popular Christian thinkers out there, these big names, have been discussing this shift from belief to beloving. Diana Butler Bass is a professor up at Harvard. She's a theology professor, and I think she coined this word beloving to be an alternative to believing. She points out that doctrine, one of those kind of nasty words that really holds people back from modern church, the doctrine of the church. She says that word comes from the same root as doctor, a word that we think of as healing and caring, a word that we think of as saving even. A quote from her, when beliefs become fences to mark the borders of heresy, they lose their spiritual energy. Doctrine is to be the balm of a healing experience of God, not a theological scalpel to wound and exclude people. When beliefs fence us off from each other, they're not doing their job. But when we can come together in trust of God, in trust of a healing experience of God, I think that's what God had in mind. Marcus Borg is another person who's been using this difference between belief and beloved. He's writing a new book. It's not out yet, but in the draft he says, he uses a few other words, grounding or centering our experience with God. Beginning our relationship of faith is about beloving to Him. And he defines beloving in this way. If you flip over your bulletin or at the back of it there, at the very bottom of the order of worship, there's a quote from his draft, his new book. Paying attention, beloving is paying attention to our relationship with the beloved. Spending time with it, being present in it. It means radical trust in the beloved, radical trust in God. And Borg knows that you can believe all the right things and still be a jerk. You can believe a huge list of things about Jesus but never really act like him. You can believe all the things that your church or your denomination or whatever tells you to believe, but that doesn't add up to a faith journey. But Borg also knows, and I hope that we can hear Jesus when he says this, that when God is at the center of your life, you can't help but see the world in a different way. When God is at the center of our life, when we really trust that God is looking out for us, your life can't help but be a little transformed. When God's at the center of our life, as though we are a child coming to a safe new friend, we spend time with God. We're more loyal to God's will. God is present in our life, and people can tell. Calvin used a different word. He called it piety, which has a lot of baggage in our world today. But Paul, the guy who wrote a lot of the New Testament, the word he used, the closest one I can get to the word he used here, is reconciled, which is a heavy Bible word that means, as far as I can tell, God acts in such a loving way, so many loving ways, that we cannot help but respond by trusting God to continue acting that way for us and by loving our neighbors. The Greek word for belief is pistis. It is a rather common word. About 88% of the time, the sense of the word in the Scriptures is, I trust you, God. I trust the one who loves me. And I have faith that the good news is that God is love. And God is looking out for me. And I have such faith. I personally have faith that God is on my side. I hope you can have faith that God is on your side so that we can cleave ourselves to God and to God's will. Now, this is not a magic formula to make your life easier. There's no promise that by pointing yourself toward trusting God that the tough things of life are going to go away. In fact, they're going to continue. But to begin our faith journey, to start by directing ourselves to a little more trust, might help us through some of those difficulties. It might ease anxiety or offer comfort. Grounding our faith in a beloved trust might lead to a wholeness in our life. And when we do this as a congregation, to begin at the beginning for a group of people to aim our trust toward God. That might move this community to compassion. It might make us just. It might make us right the wrongs of the world and connect with other people on this journey and liberate ourselves for our own discipleship. And those are the next 3 weeks. May it be so. Let us sing our next hymn, verses 1 and 5.